This media frenzy has been a whirlwind experience. I honestly thought that when I shared some of my initial findings online, that it would be of interest to my many friends in the genealogical and historical communities, maybe to other, Creole descendants here in New Orleans. But it has been posted, reposted many, many times, and it's caught the attention of the media. And I'm glad, because I hope it draws attention to our history here in New Orleans, to our local Creole population, and to the long history of Catholicism in our city. My name is Jari Honora. I'm a native New Orleanian, and I work as family historian here at the Historic New Orleans Collection. My work is partially serving as one of the many senior reference associates in the reading room of the Williams Research Center, so responding to queries both in person and via phone calls and emails, and in a particular way tackling genealogical puzzles, historical puzzles that come up that involve people. We have others who have more expertise in property research or cemetery research, but I focus on the people and piecing them together in family groups and biographical details, that sort of thing. Yesterday morning, after the announcement of the new Holy Father and listening to his address and his blessing to the city and to the world, curiosity got the best of me, really. And I started looking into his ancestry. First on his father's side, because Prevost, definitely a French name. And I thought that he would be, from some part of the Francophone world, maybe Canadian, maybe from France itself. And I reached a stopping point on his father's side and shifted just as a sort of natural thing to his mother's side, his mother being Mildred Agnes Martinez. And I saw listed online that she was of, quote, Spanish extraction. And that's what I expected to find. When I pulled her abstract of her birth certificate, as well as her entry from the Social Security Death Index, these are all sources that are available online now, I saw that her parents were listed as being from New Orleans, and her mother's maiden name, Baquier, was a bit surprising to me, because most of the carriers of that name that I'm familiar with are people of color, particularly from New Orleans. And from there, I was able to locate the marriage of the parents for Mildred Martinez, who were listed, dated 1887. And then censuses for 1910, 1900, 1880, 1870 documented the family groups and led me to their parents, so that would be the great-grandparents of Pope Leo Jacques Martinez and Marie Rosa Ramos and Ferdinand Baquier and Eugenie Grandbois. Beautiful names, some of which are not particularly common anymore, but all from right here in New Orleans. And so I pursued his mother's line and uncovered a lot of information that documented their lives in New Orleans up to 1910. At some point between 1910 and 1912, the family of Joseph and Louise Martinez left New Orleans and moved to Chicago, where their seventh and last daughter, Mildred, the Holy Father's mother, was born. So all of her six older sisters and her parents, grandparents, and what have you, were all rooted right here in New Orleans. Census records for New Orleans, 1910, 1900, 1880, 1870, and even going back before the Civil War, all contain the members of the Martinez and the Baquier families. And in most cases, through all of those decades, they were listed as either black or mulatto, or listed in vital records as colored, which was very intriguing, but it wasn't surprising, because so many New Orleans families at one point in time identified as people of color, but you usually see when there's a migration to Los Angeles or to Chicago or some other, metropolis, it sometimes comes with a shift in racial identification from black or colored or mulatto to white. We say passe blanc, to pass for white. and it's impacted almost all of our families. And we understand it was a decision people made to protect their livelihoods. It was an economic decision, and in some cases, a way to avoid episodes of violence that, if they were able to do so physically, slipped into the white world, you could say. So that was interesting. But I think the discovery's impact is really that it highlights the Catholic population of New Orleans. New Orleans is the second oldest diocese in this country, only after Baltimore. New Orleans Diocese, now Archdiocese, was erected in 1793, and the fact that we have the distinct claim among American dioceses of having ancestral ties to the Pope is just incredible. I think it's also important because it demonstrates the long roots of our Black Catholic community here, both in freedom and in enslavement. And that was particularly important for me as a Black Catholic from New Orleans, from South Louisiana, that of all people, the Holy Father shares those common roots. With the Holy Father's family, his grandfather listed his place of birth on his marriage license as Haiti. In one or two censuses, it's listed as Haiti. On the birth certificate of the Pope's mother, it's listed as Dominican Republic, which are two halves of the same island. The wrench in the works, per se, is that in the 1870 census, when Joseph Norvel Martinez was a boy, and 1870 census, when he was more of an adolescent, his birthplace is listed as Louisiana, as are those of all of his siblings. And so it makes us wonder, which one should we give more weight to? And these are the kinds of conflicts that we grapple with in genealogical research on a daily basis. We try to resolve those conflicts as best we can, or truthfully say that we're not able to make a more definite conclusion at that time. One of the things that I remember reading about the Holy Father is that he was open to a vocation from a very young age, open to receiving that call, in part because of the example of all of the priests who were in and out of his childhood home, because they loved his mother's cooking. And now that we know that she was a New Orleanian on both sides of her family, it's no wonder that those priests up there in Chicago loved her cooking, because she was a New Orleans Creole cook. In the case of the Holy Father's family, his grandfather, I can tell you, was a cigar maker here in New Orleans, which was a very common profession. In 1900, they lived at 1933 North Prior Street, which is right in the 7th Ward, just a few steps from Claiborne Avenue. And unfortunately, the house, like so many others, was taken by the Claiborne Avenue overpass. His grandparents were married at Our Lady of the Sacred Heart Church, which was on Annette Street then, but it was destroyed by the hurricane in 1915. So lots of connections to that 7th Ward neighborhood. The 7th Ward is but one of the 17 wards that we have in New Orleans, and it's gained a degree of renown because of the number of these Creole of color families who lived there. Not exclusively in the 7th Ward. They lived in every ward of the city, but there was just a concentration of them in the 7th Ward, and they were tight-knit, strong emphasis on education and on Roman Catholicism, of course, and the cultural practices that distinguish any group of people. And that's the neighborhood in which the Pope's family lived when they were here in New Orleans. I think that the rest of the country should care about this discovery, because it tells us a lot about the lengths to which people will go when they find themselves oppressed, when they find themselves subject to unfair and unjust laws and conditions, as well as the prevalence of racial passing. It's a phenomenon that I think not many Americans are familiar with. This notion that people will pick up stake, per se, and migrate to a new town and identify as something other than what they are is still relatively new for a lot of people. I do believe that this discovery is an example of how interwoven our family stories are in this country. We like to reduce or simplify our ancestry, the way that we describe ourselves, to I'm Irish, I'm Polish, but there are so many connections to other regions, to other faith traditions, to other races perhaps, when we take a deep dive into our ancestries and try to flesh out their lives, not just merely put down birth, marriage, and death dates, but really try to get an understanding of who our ancestors were.